Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Broc Gardner versus the World. I am your host, Broc Gardner. This show is not sponsored, so you can support us for free by subscribing, liking, commenting, or leaving a 5-star review. Thanks so much for listening, and enjoy the show.
Nice.
Yeah. Did you say you were in LA?
Yeah, I'm in like LA area, Southern California.
How long have you been there?
Off and on for a long time. I mean, I went to college down here and then moved around to a bunch of different places, but accumulatively, probably like 5 or 6 years.
Gotcha. That's awesome.
I grew up in Washington State, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
Sweet. So let's just get started then. So first off, do you want to just introduce yourself and kind of like your brand? Like, what do you do?
Okay. I'm Matthew Callans, and now I own a kind of full-blown nutrition company called Arete Nutrition, but it started as just individual products. The first product that we started was Shredibles, which was actually a CBD protein bar, and that's what me and my business partner and best friend since I was a child, his name's Roddy, that was kind of our first stab at the entrepreneurial world. And the CBD space was really big a couple of years ago, and we were kind of we positioned ourselves well for that wave and kind of got in there before anyone really started making a real mark in the market. And so that did well. We built that for like a year and a half, and actually ended up selling the majority ownership of that company to a larger public company that came in and bought us out. And so we were still, hands-on operationally and kind of steering the ship of the company still. But it was a really cool experience for us to build something and then, expand it and then sell it off and kind of see how that deal structure can flow. Long story short, the company that ended up acquiring us, our visions didn't fully match up, and they weren't able to kind of do the work that they said that they were going to do for the brand in the timeline that we had been promised. So we ended up taking back the company. So we took back full ownership of Shredibles. But in that meantime, we had also started these 2 other product companies, which one was a functional mushroom extract gummy that's called Shroomy, which utilizes functional mushrooms that grow in nature that are natural energy boosters, cognitive boosters, immunity system boosters. And so we took those extracts and put them into a tasty little gummy and called it Shroomy. The mushroom market is really expanding and growing rapidly right now, very similar to how the CBD space was a couple of years ago. But the only products on the market right now are, tinctures, powders, pills, things that are pretty bitter tasting, especially since the mushrooms themselves kind of have a bitter flavor. So the whole thought there was to just create something that made the consumption experience something that was enjoyable, just because we had realized how beneficial these mushroom extracts were to our own health and our own levels of happiness. So we wanted to kind of share that on a large scale by making it easy to consume. And then we also have the third product under the nutrition company it's called Root Strength, and it's a coffee replacement and a pre-workout. So we use similar mushroom extracts just to give you really good, long-lasting, sustainable energy without the caffeine that's typically in most pre-workouts. I mean, if you look at a normal pre-workout label, it's like 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine, whereas Root Strength has 40 milligrams of caffeine per serving, but it makes up for it with, the adaptogens that are in there as well. So it gives you really good energy throughout the day. So those are the 3 products that are underneath the Arete Nutrition Company. And Arete is actually an old Greek word that basically means excellence in all entities of life. So it wasn't just about being really good at one thing specifically. It was like an excellent life was considered to be a life that was filled with balance and, intention put on everything instead of just one domain. And so kind of like a well-rounded, excellent life was considered Arete. And so that's why we named the nutrition company that, because we had, seemingly kind of all over the place products that maybe wouldn't necessarily go together. But when you're thinking about your health, it's a balanced approach that's going to get you to the place that you want to be. And so that balance, that excellence in all directions, that's where the Arete name came from. And then on top of all that, sorry, this has been like such a mouthful of even just a simple question of like what I do. But then on top of all that, I run a podcast show that's called The Symphony, where we break down one important topic each week in 30 minutes or less typically. So we release the episodes on Monday. But the way that I like to frame it is that the podcast platform kind of represents the lifestyle that the brands stand for. So like the brands are standalone, stand for all this stuff like, you know, health, longevity, plant-based nutrition, living an active lifestyle. And then the podcast side of things kind of takes a deeper dive into like the mindset that it takes to really cultivate a positive internal and external experience for yourself. And like, you know, we take on, like, some of our episodes will be about, you know, how to start a startup, or like things to expect when you're getting into that world, or, you know, meal plans, workout routines. We try to plug a lot of resources from other people who are talking about progressive ideas, and just ways to live more sustainably and more intentional. So it's kind of like an all-encompassing lifestyle, media, and information sharing platform. So yeah, those are Symphony and Arete Nutrition are kind of the two main things that I oversee and run on a day-to-day basis.
So what I get from that spiel is that you're a pretty busy guy, right?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I mean, I'm definitely busy, and I have, you know, 100 different things that I could be doing every single day, but it's interesting. And I remember when I was even getting into the entrepreneurial space too, like someone told me, you know, like if you do one or two things, it can feel like, you know, there's endless things to do. But if you do like 5 things, somehow there's like this middle ground where you can find where like your output is basically translating into benefit for multiple things. So you're doing just as much work as you would be if you only had 2 things that are kind of under your own management. But because you're able to do these things really well, you're actually benefiting the 5 things that you're kind of involved with. And so, and especially with the things that I have going on too, between Arete and Symphony, there's so much overlap in terms of what they all stand for and kind of how they work, and the lifestyle that they're all promoting. So, you know, if I spend an entire day working on Symphony stuff, chances are there is plenty of opportunity for whatever work I'm doing, whether I'm writing copy for Instagram or writing an article or even producing a podcast. Like there's always an opportunity to kind of overlap the work that I can be doing for Arete Nutrition. So like if I'm talking on a podcast, I can be, you know, talking about a lifestyle where you're acting intentionally, you're putting good things in your body, and then, you know, you can plug the products and be like, here are 2 really easy, good tasting things that you can add into your day that will help you make a more conscious decision of what you're putting into your body, and therefore you'll, you know, feel better, look better, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely busy, but there's overlap that kind of helps me be able to maintain a balance of work time and free time.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting concept. It's kind of aiming to have all this overlap so that when you're working on one thing, it's also helping you in these other areas of your life. So like an example that I was just thinking of was, so I'm leaving for college pretty soon. And so I'm going to go to a whole different city, go to this new college, this new school, and I'm going into broadcasting media as my major. So I'll be taking classes like that, and taking those classes will inevitably help me with podcasting. And also I'm working on getting a job at like a radio station. So those kind of 3 aspects of my life will kind of help each other out, if that kind of relates 100%. To that.
Yeah, it totally relates.
So let's kind of get on a timeline real quick. Let's start from the beginning, because I want to hear some of these stories. So after you graduated high school, what was kind of your mindset about college? Speaking of college, when you were about to graduate, and what did your life kind of look like? What was your trajectory like?
Honestly, I wasn't really stoked on college when I was graduating high school. I didn't really feel like I wanted to go, but I mean, both of my older brother went to college, both my parents went to college. That was very much the route that all my friends were taking. And so it kind of just got to this point where it was like, okay, you're going to have to go to college, so make a decision here. But at the time, you know, sports were kind of my life. Like I played basketball and football and was pretty good at both, and had an opportunity to like go play both at smaller schools essentially. So it wasn't anything crazy, but just like I love sports. They were a huge part of my life. And I was like, well, if I'm going to go to college, I might as well like go to a place where I can play sports and have a good time. And I also wanted to, you know, move out. I grew up in Washington State, so I wanted to experience a different place and see what that could bring. So I ended up going to Chapman University, which is in Southern California, a small school. And, you know, with the intention of playing football and basketball. But then I got through one football season and I was like, wow, that was not very fun.
Yeah.
I didn't really like my teammates, didn't really like my coaches. I had a bunch of other friends who were there at school, but I saw them, you know, doing their whole social scene, joining fraternities, joining sororities, having a bunch of fun. And I was literally, you know, it's a full-time job once you get to college too. I mean, so if you are not in a place where you're just so gung-ho about it, it's, you know, it might be time to pump the brakes with something like that. Cause I was just like in, you know, 4 hours of meetings and then going to like an hour of lifting and then like 2-hour practice. And then like, by the time I'm finally getting back to my, you know, dorm room at whatever, like 9 o'clock, I still have schoolwork to do. So there was just no time for social life. And, you know, to me, that's been an important piece of my life too, is being able to kind of expand socially and try out different things. And so it just started to feel like sports was going to kind of create a very limited experience from university. And so I decided not to play basketball, and I actually ended up I stopped playing football there as well, and joined a fraternity, met some really good friends, and just had a pretty like quote unquote normal college experience. And, you know, looking back, I would probably use that time differently, but I had fun. I mean, I studied business, and then my minor was leadership, and then had a bunch of fun within the fraternity, held some like executive positions within that, which is like kind of like running a business on a very small scale in some ways. And so, but graduating college, like I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that I didn't want to jump right into the working world in terms of like quote unquote corporate 9 to 5. Like that just didn't really seem like the style that I was going to gravitate toward. But I also didn't know what else I wanted to do. And so that led me to make the decision to actually go and do this position at an orphanage in Guatemala, where it was a 13-month-long stint. So me and one of my best friends from college ended up doing that, where we were living and working at this orphanage and teaching English during the weeks. So I was literally teaching, you know, like kindergarten through 2nd grade Guatemalan kids English. That was like my day job for a year after college. But then on the weekends, we got to go travel. We saw a ton of Central and South America, had all types of different experiences, just like, you know, created this entirely new perspective of the world and different cultures and people. And you know, this was at a very pivotal time in my life too, because I was seeing all my friends that I graduated college with starting to get into their day jobs, and most of them were hating it. Like most of them absolutely hated what they were doing. And so I was fortunate in the sense that I had that time to kind of like, you know, I had real purpose for why I was in Guatemala. Like I was there, I had a job, and I was, you know, relatively busy, but I also had time and space to kind of observe what was going on back in the States and kind of really think about where I wanted to be when I got back there. And I said no to a pretty lucrative job opportunity coming out of college to even go to Guatemala. And so that was kind of, you know, that was something that, you know, some of my friends or some family members were kind of like, really? Like, why are you doing this? So that was kind of the first time that I had really had to like make a big time decision for my life that came from a place of intuition rather than kind of just, you know, doing what everyone around me was doing and kind of like finding myself on the same path that my environment produced. And so that was like a monumental decision for me. And then I ultimately ended up benefiting a lot from that situation and having that time and that, you know, introspective period of time while I was in Guatemala. And then I ultimately was able to kind of use all of that and then bring it back with me when I got back to the States and launch into the entrepreneurial path that I've been on for the past 3+ years. So, so that's a brief rundown of high school, college, and then starting point into all of this other stuff.
So there's a lot of things I need to break that down a little bit. There's a lot of questions that I came up with during that. So you mentioned first that you grew up in Washington. So what do you think growing up there did for kind of your business? Like, how do you think where you grew up affected your life and your business decisions? If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, have you been to Washington?
Yeah.
Ever?
Yeah, I've been.
Cool. Yeah. It's a really, really beautiful state,
Yeah.
and it's just filled with dense nature.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you drive, 30 minutes in any direction, chances are you're going to end up in a forest or, at the foot of a mountain. So, and that is one thing that I've carried with me throughout my entire life, is just kind of keeping an awareness and an appreciation of nature and the natural world kind of at the center of my operating system, and just kind of like learning lessons from nature. And I actually talked about that recently in one of my podcasts on the Symphony platform, about how you can learn basically any lesson you would ever need to learn by just observing nature.
Yeah.
And how, and I think I alluded to a river, and how, when there's a huge boulder in the middle of a river, the river is not trying to just plow through it, right? It finds ways to move around it and then continue flowing, eventually into the ocean. So, and I would like equate that to problem solving in my own life, so it's like, sometimes when you have a problem that comes up, the best solution is not to try to just run through it. Maybe you have to innovate further. Maybe you have to find ways to work around it, or go, under it or over it, or like whatever. But so I think a general awareness of the lessons that you can take away from nature is like one of the main things that I took from growing up in Washington. And, as a result, I mean, if you look at all of the businesses that we have going on now, like we try to keep everything that we do relatively in alignment with nature. So we're like trying to act sustainably. We're doing plant-based nutrition, so we're not harming the environment. We're encouraging through all of our marketing and all of our social media people to get out into nature, to live an active lifestyle, to just kind of like pay attention to everything that's around us, just because that's brought so much to our lives. And, in a lot of ways we could equate that to what led us to being in this position of having all of these companies and starting these brands. And so that's something that we kind of try to encourage in all of our outward facing media and content. And so I think, I mean, a solid argument could be made for where that came from, in terms of it coming from where I grew up and getting that inspiration from Washington.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's kind of a weird question that I asked, but I'm just interested to see like how people's environments kind of shape what they do in life. I just think that's an interesting concept. But okay, so what I was gonna say, you mentioned when you were in college, you wish you would have done some stuff differently. What do you mean by that? Like, go into detail. What would you have done differently?
I think, you can probably relate to this too, unless you take, I mean, everyone's different, but I feel like growing up, and definitely in high school, your education was just something that you kind of had to do. Mm-hmm. And so you just, you study for the test and you get your grade on the test, and then you forget all of that information that you studied for, right? Because you don't make that connection of like, oh, if I learn this now, I'll be able to plug this into my life in like this way. That piece of the connection is just like not quite there yet. And I think that carried on into college. So like my mindset in college was like, oh, what's the most like general education that I could get that's like not going to be, super hard, that will just like allow me to kind of like have fun and do my thing in college. Whereas like now I think I have such a different appreciation of like education and knowledge in general. And just like, I'm fascinated by the concept that basically anything that you can ever think of, there are ways that are accessible to you to be able to learn about it and then integrate it into your life. And like, in a lot of ways, that's what I've been doing in my professional life for the past 3 years, is because it's like, there's no school of like how to, run a startup, and definitely not how to run 3 startups all at once. Like a lot of that, no matter what, like even if you did take like an entrepreneurial business class in college, like there are things that you just kind of have to learn on the fly. And so if you're not someone who seeks out knowledge and information, like you might struggle in that sector, because like you need to be constantly learning and constantly innovating and paying attention and forming new connections, new solutions, all of that stuff. And so I think now, like if I were to go back to college, I feel like it would be for such a or not go back to college, but go back to school, it would be for such a specific purpose, and it would be something that I'm like deeply interested about. And, you know, I feel like I would go back less for the social aspect and more for, you know, trying to extend or hone a craft that I think would be important for me to utilize in a professional sense. That's like the main differentiator, I would say.
Gotcha. So would that be like, what's one piece of advice you would give somebody that's about to go to college? Would that be it?
I would just say like try to truthfully identify what you're curious about. Because I think, you know, going to college, you kind of get segmented into these like, oh, like business major or, you know, this or that, and you kind of just like flow wherever your friends are going or wherever your parents are telling you to. So like, I guess, and this isn't like profound advice or anything, but just like really be intentional about identifying what you're curious about. And like, maybe even without thinking about how it could turn into a profession. Cause I feel like, and I fell into this category too, because like coming out of high school, I was like, oh, I'm really curious about psychology and like philosophy, but like the main responses I would hear to that were like, oh, well, like, what are you going to do? But like be a teacher or, you know, like be a therapist, like that, you know? And so they like immediately tried to narrow the trajectory of what that can look like. And I don't know, I just don't know if I fully agree with that, just because I think if you go toward what you are genuinely curious about, you will find ways to innovate around that with with any of the lessons that you learned like through your college time. And like, I think we live in a world of endless possibilities. And so, you know, I don't think that just because it hasn't been done before, or that typically there aren't a lot of career paths in this one domain, like, I don't think things like that should stop you from pursuing what you're actually interested about. Just because I think if you're interested about something and you're passionate, then you will find solutions and find ways to integrate it into a way that makes sense for you in your professional life and your personal life. So go towards curiosity is what I would say.
So when did that happen for you? Like, when did that kind of click in your head, what you were curious about?
That's tough. I think developing a liking of reading kind of helped me with that. And so when I was in Guatemala for that year, like there was really no internet, there's no TV, like really no external entertainment things going on. So like, but there were a ton of books. And so I just got hooked. And I'd always, you know, I've appreciated writing and books in the past, but like I had never like really taken a deep dive and like read just like a madman like I did for that year in Guatemala, because there were so many books. And I started just reading, you know, a handful that I was like, damn, like these are really adding a lot to my perspective of being here, or these are, you know, or I'm learning about something that I had no idea about before. And so that's what kind of like sparked my interest in just that concept of like, wow, I can kind of learn about anything that I want to learn about just by like finding a book that's on that topic, and that will, you know, add something to my life. And so that's when it kind of clicked for me. And then I just kind of like extended that practice even when I got back, and just continued to do that and seek out things that I was interested in and curious in. And that really helped me in a business sense too, because it's like, you know, no one's out there writing a book about like how to do whatever you're trying to do, but they've probably written books that are similar to what you're doing. So like, you know, when I'm starting Shredibles for the first time, I'm reading, you know, entrepreneurial books about how to take a business from 0 to 1, or I'm reading about, you know, other people who have, like, I'm listening to podcasts from like the guy who started RX Bar and kind of listening to the trials and tribulations that he went through when he was doing his thing. Or, you know, just so, and then like with the Symphony stuff too, of like, okay, I want to build a podcast platform. Like, do I have any experience doing this? Like, no, but there are, you know, so many resources out on the internet of people that I can learn from. So I would just like, so that's what made me gravitate towards the figures like Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan, who are like hosting some of the most substantial podcasts in the world right now, and kind of like seeing what they like to do. And like, they have awesome resources that they're plugging too. Like Tim Ferriss has written like 5 or 6 books, and they're all about like hacking your lifestyle so that you can kind of do all of these things. Like the 4-hour work week is literally
I'm
about
in the middle of that book right now. It's insane.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It's great. It's great. And he has another one that's on my desk right now. It's called Tools for Titans. And it's literally like
that on Audible too.
Yeah. Like he spent, a solid chunk of his time finding people that he looked up to or respected. And he literally compiled all of their advice and into like a single book for people to use and like plug into their life. And so it's just like, there are so many things like that out there, but if you're not curious about them, or if you're like, oh, like I don't like to read, or like you have to read if you want to learn, like at least in some format. If you're an audiobook person, that's great too. But like, there's so much out there, and there's knowledge and wisdom passed down in all different types of mediums. And so like, and that's where the curiosity piece comes in, is like, that has to be because like you won't get anything from it if you don't want to, you know what I mean? Like, because that was one of my main problems with school, is it's just like, I'm getting handed these books, these textbooks, or these like lectures, and like, they're telling you like, oh, you should care about this. But I'm like, well, why? Like, why should I care about this? Whereas like, if you're identifying something where you're like, oh, that would be really cool for my life, and then because of that curiosity, you stumble across these resources, like that's a way different entry point to grasping that information than it is of like having someone just be like, here, read this because it's good for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I want to get into reading and books a little bit more later, because I think we have some good points to talk about there. But let's just keep going down the timeline real quick. So you mentioned that you turned down a job. Did you turn down a job before you went to Guatemala? So
yeah, before and after, actually.
Oh yeah. So let's talk about the one before first, because I want to kind of get into Guatemala and your decision to go there. So let me try and phrase this question. So what kind of went into the decision of not only turning down the job, but also wanting to go to Guatemala to the orphanage for a year? What was the thought process like there?
Well, the thought process was that if I accepted this job, which was in medical sales, so it was a cool job, and I had that was my internship my junior year summer of college, was working for that company over the summer. And then at the end of that summer, they offered me a job for like the following year after I graduated college. So I went into my senior year of college having a job lined up for afterwards. And it was kind of like halfway through that year where I started to have this realization of like, if I do this, I'm probably gonna like stay with it, because I knew older people within that company who had been there for like 30 plus years. And I kind of like saw that was, and then things change. But like in my mind, I was like, if I do this, like I might be kind of like stuck in this for a long time. And like, I've always been a really creative person, and had a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit since I was really young. And so I knew that there was something that I wanted to at some point be like, I want to try something for myself, to like create something or make something, and just kind of like figure it out on my own, instead of just getting into the world where you're just like taking that next step of other people telling you what to do and how to be. And this is to say nothing bad about the job opportunity or anybody who like wants to go in that direction once they graduated college. Like it wasn't fully grabbing me like I felt like it should. And then, so the Guatemala thing, I had actually had a connection to this orphanage before, because when I was really young, when I was like 10 years old, my family had heard about this orphanage from a family friend of ours. And they were involved in service trips there and did stuff like that. And so we actually went on one of those to the same orphanage that I would later work at when I was like 10. And we built a playground and just like spent a bunch of time with the kids and just hung out. And it was really fun. And I had a blast, and was just, I got to give a shout out to my parents for like taking me there at such a young age and like showing me different parts of the world. Because I think that's ultimately such a huge piece of keeping an open mind, is just seeing that there are different places around the world that are different, and that's a good thing and not a threatening thing. Like I think that helps a lot, especially for younger people, to kind of open up their perspective of, how people live and what people do. So senior year, I, know I have this job lined up, but then kind of randomly at the beginning of that year, I was like, well, like maybe I'll just throw in an application for that volunteer program in Guatemala at that orphanage. and just see what comes of it. Like not really thinking much of it. And I actually convinced one of my good friends to do it as well. So we put it in at the beginning of the year, don't hear back for like 6 or 7 months. And then I kid you not, like a week before graduation, we both got acceptance letters to this program down in Guatemala. And, you know, I'm supposed to start my other job like a month and a half later or something like that. And we kind of just both had this moment of being like, we should do this. Like we should just go for this. And that was kind of it. Like it wasn't this like super thought out thing. It was just kind of like wow, this feels more aligned than the alternative. And so like, let's just make this decision and then not think anymore about it. And so we did. And then literally 11 days later, we were in Guatemala. So it was a pretty quick turnaround from like college, graduation, and then like you're in a third world country working at an orphanage, like trying to speak a language you don't speak yet. Like crazy transition.
Was there ever a point where you kind of regretted that decision? Like maybe I shouldn't have gone this route, or no?
Yeah, definitely. Like quite a bit, but like more so at first too. But and then I think that's another lesson that I took away from that also, is being like, you know, I mean, you can, because that self-talk throughout is what's really important, because there were days that were like so difficult and so challenging, and I missed home, and I was like mad that I wasn't home with all my friends. And I was like, wow, I still have like 11 months left in this place. Like I'm not making any progress with my Spanish. The kids won't listen to me in class. Like the food's bad. Like there's no internet, like all this stuff, like just, you know, constant. You could focus on everything that was like not going quote unquote well. But then also, I think one of the biggest learning experiences for me was like, you have the opportunity to make every situation what it's going to be by the way that you choose to frame it in your mind. And so I think that at any point you can reframe that for yourself and be like, no, like, what am I really taking away from this experience? Like, how can I bring myself to this so that I'm not just being this like mopey, you know, low energy, low vibrational being that's just like giving a half-assed effort to everything that I'm at. And so like that decision to kind of just like be exactly where you are and be there for the full thing without wondering about what you could be doing or where you could be, like, I think that's, you know, a lesson that I try to carry with me in my day-to-day life now too, is just like be present, jump in the pool with both feet, like just be there, you know, and trust that you're going to like learn something from the experience or take a new perspective away from it. And then like, because if you're thinking that way, then you will, like, no matter how bad or bleak the situation is, like if you have, you know, an awareness that you're going to gain something from it, whether it be tomorrow or in like 10 years, it just makes your life better, you know, because you can focus on all the negatives no matter where you are in life. I mean, everyone has problems. Everyone has things they're working through. And our level of happiness oftentimes just comes down to what we're choosing to focus on.
I believe that full-heartedly, man. That's a good piece of advice. What other lessons or learning experiences did you have in Guatemala?
I think this kind of goes along with what I just said, but like having a humility when you go and see different places of the world, because I think it's very common, especially for Americans, to go to, you know, another place in the world, like especially maybe a place that's like less financially stable than we are here in the United States, and be like, oh, like this is bad because it's not like it is. Like you're comparing it to your situation in America. And I think that's like a huge takeaway that I had from this year is like travel and just life itself is not about comparison. It's just, you know, you go there with an open mind, you accept the culture for what it is, and you understand that culture was built off of, you know, thousands of years of things that like you were not there for and that you don't understand. So like, and there's beauty in every single culture, like no matter what, you know? So instead of going there with this lens on of like, okay, how is this in comparison to America? But rather like, oh, like how is this culture? Like, I'm so curious about this. Like, let me be here. Let me let me just kind of like immerse myself in whatever's going on without trying to like fit it into my box of how I think that it should be. And so, and that's a mindset that extends past traveling. I think that's something that you should just try to utilize in your day-to-day life and in your conversations with other people. Like, because you can always go into a conversation being like, oh, like, what's this person, like, what does he have to tell me that I don't already know? Or like, he could like just having a more of an open mind of just like trusting that you can learn something from everybody and everything and take, and I think that's something that I really, that I took away from Guatemala for sure. And I try to keep that with me in my day to day. Also just like humility and like not having preconceived notions about anything, because I think if you're always living in expectation and comparison, you're never like fully experiencing the true beauty of the present moment. And so, and that's where all the real true beauty is in like your day-to-day interactions and your ability to just be there. So that's another big thing that I took away.
Yeah. The open-mindedness thing is something that I've just noticed a lot of people, like how many people miss out on so much good info or like good experiences just because they choose to shut their mind off to it just because of some, like you said, preconceived notion that they have about a person or a place or an idea. It's just crazy.
It can limit your experience quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Where else have you traveled?
Ooh, let's see. So I did a good amount of traveling within Guatemala. I got to see the coast, and we went to different places all around kind of within it. But then we made it to Mexico. I've been to Mexico City. We went to Tulum. Where else did we go? We did a trip to Costa Rica with 10 of our friends during that year, which was really fun. We rented a van and just kind of cruised the whole coast, which was a really good time, even though we got robbed like 2 days into it, but that's a whole other story. But then I went to El Salvador. I think we made it to Honduras at some point. And then, other places. I've been to Canada. I've been to places in Europe. I've been to a handful of places in Italy, Florence, Rome, Switzerland. Been to San Sebastian, Spain, Amsterdam, Chamonix, France. Where else? I know that I'm forgetting some, but yeah, it's a pretty good list.
That's a lot of places, man.
It's a lot of places, yeah.
How old are you? Let me ask that first. How old are you?
How old do you think I am? I want to ask you that.
If you didn't have the mustache, I might say like 23, 24.
Yeah, I'm 27. I just turned 27.
Yep, so you've traveled to all these places and you're only 27. What do you attribute that to? How have you managed to travel all these places? I guess financially and time-wise, do you think it's just based on the career you picked, or what do you think?
Well, it depends on where you want to travel, because I think a lot of people hear travel and they're like, oh, that's going to be expensive no matter how I do it. But like almost all of my Central and South American travels have been, and I've stayed for like a good amount of time too, like months at a time. Yeah. Where I've like saved a monumental amount of money by like not being in the United States. And so I think that's a good lesson too for young people to hear, is just like, you can travel very, very, very cheaply and like figure out, cause in Guatemala, I mean, we stayed at, when I went back the most recent time, so not the year that I was there, but when I went back the most recent time with my girlfriend, we stayed for like a little over a month, and the rent at the place we were staying was like $700 or something. So we're splitting that. So I'm paying like $300 of rent basically. Yeah. And I ended up staying longer. So I was like, that was what I was paying. And then on top of a plane ticket. So like the plane ticket is typically the most expensive part, but like once you're there are ways to travel so cheaply and like figure that out. It just depends on like what your standards are of like where you want to stay and what you want to do. But I mean, I think a lot of people write off the possibility of traveling just because they think it's too expensive, but I don't think that that's always the case. And I think it just takes a little bit more due diligence before you go there, and you can really make it work however you want. But then, some of the European trips, that was more like I got to tag along on my sister's like graduation present Europe trip.
Yeah.
And like, so that was like a few of those different countries that I said, just because Europe, there's places of Europe that are pretty expensive.
Yeah.
But just in general, like, I think that there are ways, like, you can find cheaper places to stay. You just got to do a little bit more digging. But yeah, I would encourage people to not write off extended traveling because they think that they can't. That's something that Tim Ferriss talks about quite a bit.
Yeah. I've started to kind of have that mindset ever since I found Tim Ferriss and started reading 4-Hour Work Week. Because that just, I don't know, dude. It's so, it makes you realize there's so many places in the world that how many people get to see all these different places in the world? Not very many. And it's like, you have one life to see all these things, so you may as well.
Totally. Yeah. And there's so much beauty to be seen. I mean, even in the United States, like there's so much domestic travel that I want to do as well. Like, I want to see all the national parks at some point. I think that would be a really fun trip to do. But I think, you know, no matter where you're going, I think just even if you're driving, you know, a couple hours and getting outside of your home state, like, just, you know, changing up your environment in some capacity will just add to your perspective of what's going on out there. So whether you're doing big travel across the world or even just driving a couple hours in any direction from where you're at right now, like, you'll see things that are different than what your typical experience is. And I think that that's something that's really important for people to grasp, because, and this comes back to decision making too. I mean, I feel like, especially with where you're at, like going to college, and just like your life up until this point and moving forward, like, it's very easy to just kind of do what other people around you are doing. And so I think if you can intentionally make it a point to like see how other people are doing things in different places, like even just a glimpse into that world of like, oh wow, like this is one way, but this isn't the only way. Like, I think that is something that is really, really, really important to grasp, like, especially at a young age, because you can wake up. I mean, I know people who like are waking up at 45, 50 years old and being like, fuck. Yeah. Like, this is not, sorry, I don't know if we're.
No, you're good.
Cool but just being like, wow, like, I really wish, or like are coming to some of these realizations that it sounds like, you know, you're coming to right now in your age, and like me as well, like still continuing to have these realizations. But like I'm glad that I'm having these understandings now, because I don't want to wake up at 50 and be like, damn, I really wish that I would have, you know, taken a risk or taken a chance or gone and, you know, checked out some new places or started that company I wanted to start, or any of those things, you know? So I think, that comes back to travel in a few different ways, but with the decision-making thing, I think it helps just to see that there are other potentialities out there.
Yeah. So that's one thing that I've kind of developed a real fear of, is regret. Like, I don't want to look back in 10, 20, 30 years and be like, why didn't I do that? And that's like one of my biggest motivators for like trying to make podcasting work and trying to make all this stuff I want to do happen, is because I don't want to look back when I'm an old man and be like, wow, I could have probably done that if I would have just tried a little bit harder, or went a little bit longer with it, or whatever. Random question. When you're traveling, have you ever used like couch surfer or whatever that is?
I haven't, but I mean, I'm sure that, you know, I've heard good things.
Yeah.
But is that outside of the US also? For some reason, I thought that was just like a domestic.
I think it's outside. When I was reading this blog, it said they use couch surfing a lot when traveling.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, that's a great way to go about things. 'Cause then it's like you're traveling way cheaper than you probably would if you're trying to find hotels or even hostels sometimes. Like, if you can find a homestead where you're staying with a family or just like another person, like, that's a pretty good way to go.
And it seems like it's like makes it a lot more local too. And you're actually like meeting people and getting to interact. It seems like a cool idea. But when I bring it up to a lot of people, they think it's like terrifying. So I was going to see if you have had any experiences with that.
I don't have any experiences with it, but I would 100% do it. Like,
talk about the time you got robbed that you just kind of mentioned and blew off.
Yeah, that was pretty intense, because that was like, okay, so 5 of my friends and then 5 of my buddies' friends who I was living in Guatemala with all met us in Costa Rica. And we get this van, and the first place that we go and stay at is this place called Jaco, which is a cool coastal town and like big surf town. but also like it's not like, it doesn't get a ton of outside travelers. So it's like very local oriented, and like everyone knows everyone. And it's kind of like there was a little bit of like chip on the shoulder vibe going on in that town. And like, I mean, we're 10 white, like college dudes, basically. So we stick out like a sore thumb there. And like everyone at that time is way too excited to be seeing each other, because we haven't seen them in like 10 or 11 months or whatever it was at that point. So like, we're obviously fired up. We're like having a good time, like playing drinking games on the beach, like going in the water, like doing all this stuff, just like being loud, obnoxious, fucking white kids, basically. And so in that night we go out and we're because we were going to be staying at like 6 or 7 different towns during our trip. It was like a 2-week trip, I think. And Hako was the very first place that we were staying. And so we had this like tiny little Airbnb that we were staying at, because it was only for the first night. And so it's literally 10 guys in like a 2-bedroom, tiny ass, like little house thing on the beach. And so we go out, we're like, we hit a couple clubs, like went to dinner and like are doing our whole thing. And basically long story short, we all somehow, and we had heard actually that robbers in that area were using like some type of, I don't remember the name of the gas, but like some type of gas that they would like spray into a window of a house, like while the people were in there. And it basically just like knocks the people out, so they like don't wake up. And then they like, the robbers just go in and do their thing.
That's intense.
And so like, we still don't fully know what happened, but that's my guess, because we had 10 people sleeping in this tiny place. So like, we're pretty much like all on top of each other. And like, all of us got stuff stolen that was literally like on our bodies while we were sleeping. And so, and the fact that none of us woke up, like it happened while we were all in the house, because like we still had all of our stuff when we got back that night. And then, go to sleep. And when we wake up, like all of our stuff is just gone.
That's crazy.
So it was so crazy. Oh my God. And then it was this whole fiasco, because Willis, my friend that I was there with, and I were the only 2 people that spoke Spanish. And so now we have to go to like the equivalent of the Costa Rican, like FBI, and basically file this report and tell them all of this stuff that we're missing, and be the spokesperson for all of our friends they're all freaking out, because this was like a lot of their first experience with, South American culture and like all this stuff. So it was just like, oh my God, it was so hectic. And like, and we're going into this, giving this police report, knowing that we're not going to see any of the stuff that we got stolen. Like it's gone. And like, we knew that, but we were more just going through the formalities for all of our friends, because they were like super rattled by this situation. So like, oh, it was bad. So, but I mean, it was bad, and then it turned hilarious, because it was bad and we were all bummed out and like also hungover. So it's like, that was just kind of a shitty experience. But then, we were kind of like, well, we have 2 options here. We either like pack it up and go home, or we just like continue this trip and make it what it's going to be and just have a blast. And that's what we ended up doing. Like some people had their wallets, some people didn't. So like, we just kind of, pitched in, did the whole Venmo thing, and just kind of like figured out ways to keep it going. And we ended up having like a really awesome 2-week experience that was just filled with, and I feel like we also all kind of bonded closer together because we went through that. And then afterwards it was just kind of like, you make jokes about it, you laugh through your misery, which is another lesson that I've taken away in my life, is just like having friends, like with my business partner and I, like there's no way I would have been able to start all of these things that we've started if it were just me. Like I would have given up a long time ago, but because we were like going in it together and literally always had that point of contact of like, well, I can't complain about it, because like he's right here going through it with me too. And then like, so instead of complaining about it, you make jokes about it, and that makes the situation more endurable. And then it's just like, and then it becomes okay, And so I think that was probably the first time that I like really learned that lesson, was when we all got robbed in Costa Rica, and we just kind of had no other choice but to joke around about it. But that's something that I've like kept with me in my day-to-day life now, and just kind of trying to, find the humor in heavy situations, and and then just kind of keep going.
There's that perspective thing again, man. You just got to look at it from a different lens, kind of. That's all you can do. People get too frustrated when stuff like that happens. They get, like, obviously it sucks, but people just get upset. Like, if there's nothing you can do, you got to just look at it from a different picture and just go on with life. So that's a
100%.
good lesson.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's some quote that's in my family's home in like one of the bathrooms that says like, grant me the strength to change the things I can, the willingness to let go of the things that I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah. I totally butchered that quote, but that
makes sense. Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Yeah.
That's a solid piece of advice. That's something that I feel like a lot of people need to kind of focus on. That's one thing that I notice a lot of people struggle with, is kind of just stressing about things that are out of their control. And obviously everybody does a little bit at some point, because, that's just how people are. But learning to control that kind of, and like you said, recognize it and figure out, is this something that I can actually control? No, then don't give it as much attention, because it's taking your attention away from things that you can control,
Right. Yeah.
So out of all the places you've traveled, what's been your favorite place?
Ooh, wow. That is so hard. I mean, Guatemala just has like such a special place in my heart, just because that I experienced that more in depth than anywhere else that I've been. Cause I literally spent at this point I've spent like close to 16 months there, like in total. Yeah. And so I've like really seen a lot of that country, and I just have like meaningful experiences there. So like that is like the one that comes to mind. I'm just being like, yeah, definitely. But also, Italy is such an insanely beautiful country, and it has so much diversity of landscape too. Like I thought that was really an awesome place, and so much history too. Like if you walk through, if you're in Rome and you're seeing the different structures and paintings and all of the ancient, art and architecture that's there, it's like breathtaking. But then you also have the coast, and like the Amalfi Coast in Italy is just like cliff sides with beautiful houses, and then just like bright blue water. And so I really, really, really enjoyed Italy. And Florence was amazing too, which is also in Italy. But like, there's so many places to see, man. But like, I think those two places definitely hold some importance in my life, I think. That's but awesome. I'm sure my answer would change even if you asked me like a year from now. Yeah. So there's many more places I want to get to.
Gotcha. So we're gonna wrap this up in a second. I think we need to do like another podcast, because we didn't even get into your businesses at all, which is fine. I think we've talked about some awesome stuff, but I wanna have a conversation about that later. So we need to do another show. But wrapping it up here, let's talk about some kind of some inspirational resources, stuff that's helped you during your life. So whether that's books or podcasts or whatever, just go off, talk about some of your favorite things, some of the lessons you've learned, just your favorite resources like that.
Cool. Yeah. Just podcast is an easy one to start off with. I think, definitely look into the Tim Ferriss show. 100%. I've learned so much from the different guests that have come through his show. It's insane. Like he was like my first real introduction to the podcast world also. And like, that was a great introduction, because he's had so many different guests on there that talk about like everything from psychedelics to like startups and business and like all of that stuff, and everything in between to like artists, musicians, actors, scientists, like literally anybody that you can think of or anything that you'd be curious about. Like Tim Ferriss is probably covered on one of his shows. Yeah. Joe Rogan is the same way. But then also Rich Roll. I don't know if you know who Rich Roll is. That's a good one to look into. He's a endurance athlete. He's done all these crazy like endurance races in his life. But he does like similar style as Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan, just like hosts really incredible people on his show, but it's more tailored towards like human performance and endurance, and more so like in kind of like the athletic realm, just because like that's his background. So that one's been really interesting. He actually does something that I love, which if you want to like get an entry point for his show, he does like a 2020 recap where he basically like does one episode and like includes the best clips from like his guests from the past year, like all in a single episode. So look up like Rich Roll Best of 2020 or 20, whatever it's called. You'll find it.
Yeah.
Those 3 shows are kind of the ones that I like go to in terms of podcast listening. What else? And then in terms of books, I love to read. Like I make time for reading every single morning. It's like the first thing that I do in the morning, actually. And I usually try to keep a balance of reading books that are helping me professionally, but then also reading something that's helping me creatively. So I like to read a lot of fiction actually as well. 2 fiction books just off the top are Siddhartha and The Alchemist. Those are 2 books, like very, very easy to read, very quick. And it's kind of all about, like finding your path in the world and not being afraid to kind of like make that jump and pursue what's really kind of like in your heart and in your soul. Those are really good. And then what else? My favorite book of all time is actually called Musashi. And it's a 1,000-page epic novel about the greatest samurai to ever live in Japan.
Oh yeah.
But it's like, it's like historical fiction essentially, but it is the most epic story I've ever read in my life, dude. It is like,
that's sweet.
It's so philosophical. Like it goes into like the way of the samurai and like what that means and like kind of that, level of awareness. And I don't even know like how to even put words to the impact that book had on me, but like that is my favorite book of all time. And so those are 3 fiction ones that I've read that were really interesting. I like to read a lot of ancient philosophy too, because I think that you can learn a lot from, ancient wisdom. So I'll read like Greek philosophy, like Marcus Aurelius or Plato or Aristotle and Hippocrates and people like that. Just because, and it's honestly, if you read any of those people, it's pretty astounding the things that they were pointing out that are like so true and relevant in today's world. And those were written in like 300 BC or something like that. Yeah. So that's like about as ancient as it gets.
Yeah.
And, they're talking about things that are so relevant today, which just absolutely blew my mind. Leo Tolstoy is another one that I've read a bunch of. He was a Russian philosopher, actually. Anything and everything philosophy, I love it. Alan Watts is another one that I've read a lot of. He's an American guy, actually, but who basically dedicated his life to studying like ancient Eastern tradition and philosophy and kind of like brought that messaging to a Western audience. So I've read a lot of him. But then in terms of like business books that are helping me professionally, I read Let My People Go Surfing, which is by the founder of Patagonia, actually. And so he talks about kind of and Patagonia is like one of the best companies out there doing it. I mean, they're so like, they're sustainably oriented. They like make awesome products. They try to get involved with, environmental initiatives. They, all of their practices, they try to be sustainable. And he kind of just talks about how he structured it, what he pays attention to, what he tries to get his business to stand for, and just kind of takes a deep dive into that. So I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, who was one of the co-founders of PayPal. And he just kind of talks about like, things to pay attention to when you're taking your business from nothing to something and kind of the process and what that looks like. 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I read that one recently. It took a lot away from that. He's a clinical psychologist who's honestly pretty controversial. Like if you Google him, there's a lot of people who like have, differing opinions on him, but he's a really intelligent, like deep thinking person. And he like, one of the main things that I take from him is that basically everything that you can identify in the world is so much more complicated than it looks on the surface. And so basically having these like hard set opinions about, things that you think are black and white are typically like, that's not the case. And, so he takes on a lot of controversial issues, but he's really smart and he kind of ties in religious practices with like human psychology and talks about like different motivators and different ways to kind of like, I don't know, like live in cohesion with our human consciousness essentially, which is a big one. I'm actually looking at some of the books on my bookshelf right now, seeing if I've read the Tim Ferriss books are good. 4-Hour Work Week and Tools of Titans, both really good books. Let's see. That's a pretty good list.
Can I throw one out there?
Yeah, please do.
Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Oh, that's another one. Yeah, James Clear is the homie. That's such a good book.
I heard you mention that when you were on Brian's podcast, and I was in the middle of reading that book when you mentioned that, and it was, I don't remember what part were you talking about, the 32 degrees? I don't remember what part you mentioned in there.
I don't even remember now. That book is packed with just good crazy stuff, though.
Yeah.
Basically all about, forming small day-to-day habits every single day, because the compound effect of that is just monumental.
Yeah.
And that's a huge one that I've taken away in my day-to-day life too. It's just like, you got to do the little things, because the little things turn into the big things eventually if you just like keep doing it.
So
Compound Effect is another book that kind of goes into that concept.
I'm also reading that one, right? I'm listening to that one right now.
Nice.
In the middle of that one.
Dude, I'm stoked. You're so young and you're already getting after all. This is really, it's good.
I made a goal to read 20 books this year, and I think I'm about halfway right now. Have you ever read any of the Jocko? You know Jocko Willink?
Yeah, I read Extreme Ownership by him, which is really good. And I think I love that concept too. I take a lot of inspiration from like the Navy SEAL guys and what they talk about, just because it's like the whole make your bed thing, and how like, keep everything organized, because that flows into everything else that you're doing. I think, here's another, Ryan Holiday. I don't know if you know who that is.
I feel like I've heard the name.
Yeah, he's got a couple books that I've really enjoyed. One is Stillness is the Key, which is really good. And another one is Obstacle is the Way. Those are the two ones that and there's another one called Ego is the Enemy. Mm-hmm. That like trilogy of books was really good, and kind of talks about a lot of those same principles. But one of the quotes that stands out to me from that is how you do anything is how you do everything. And so just like talking about, the importance of keeping your space tidy and all of your affairs in order.
Yeah.
Just because, how you do everything is how you're ultimately going to do everything kind of. It's like you take the same mindset to it. I think that, I got to plug my boy, Steven Kotler, because he has written phenomenal books about the psychology of flow, basically. Mm-hmm. So like what it takes to get into flow states. And so he profiles extreme athletes, he profiles Navy SEALs, like high performing tech companies and like scientists, basically like breaking down the like dynamics that are going on that are helping these high performing people get into these states of flow, and like how we can access those points of like those states of flow more easily. So one of the main, I've read a handful of his, but Stealing Fire is one of the main ones that I took a lot away from. Mm-hmm. And then The Rise of Superman, that one is specifically about extreme sports athletes. So if you're into that stuff, I would definitely read that. And then he has one that's about surfing called West of Jesus. That was really, really good as well. But just everything and anything that fits under the flow category is kind of his expertise. And he writes a lot of good books about them. So I would definitely, or at least like check out a podcast with him, because he's just a super interesting guy. Mm-hmm. I think that's all I got off the top of my head right now.
That's perfect, man. That's a solid list for people that want to start reading those kinds of books, I think. But yeah, is there any last words you want to say? You can plug all your stuff. Anything you want to say to the listeners? Yeah,
I mean, check out the product Shredibles. It's just at Shredibles on Instagram, and Shroomy is at Go Shroomy, and then Symphony is at the Symphony Co. And so and then my personal is M Callans. So that's MCALLANS. And that's how you can stay updated with kind of everything that we have going on. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't know. I'm happy that you're doing this podcast, and that you're fired up about all these things that you're fired up about, because I think it's so important for, our generation, your generation, to be thinking about these types of things and really be, focusing on developing a positive mindset you got to take care of your mind, take care of your body, and just kind of focus on things that are making your life one that you enjoy living, you know?
Yeah, I agree, man. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast. That was a solid conversation. That was pretty good.
Yeah. This has been fun, man. Happy to jump back on whenever.